Amelia had spent months crafting what she believed would be the perfect wedding. Every decision, from the silk blush drapes to the floral archway of white hydrangeas, had been curated with care. It wasn't an extravagant display of wealth, but a statement of identity, elegant, tasteful, personal. She wanted it to be a day where love was reflected not just in vows, but in the presence of everyone who mattered most. But Amelia had underestimated one thing, her mother-in-law Evelyn. From the first day of the engagement, Evelyn had taken over every corner of the planning process under the guise of helping. Her words were soft, her smile composed, but every suggestion carried an edge of control. "I just want what's best for the family," she'd always say. Yet, what's best often translated to what Evelyn wanted. The first sign of tension came with the guest list. Amelia's list was filled with friends she had grown up with, women who had seen her through heartbreaks, late-night study sessions, and triumphs. Evelyn's list, in contrast, was a scroll of distant relatives and her bridge club companions, people Amelia barely knew. When Amelia insisted that her friends were non-negotiable, Evelyn's smile tightened. "Of course," she had said. "We'll make it work." But 3 weeks before the wedding, it all began to unravel. The news came quietly, like a paper cut, small but sharp enough to sting. Amelia received a text from one of her closest friends, Lila. "Hey, I just got a call from the hotel. They said our reservation for the wedding dinner was canceled. Are you changing plans?" Confused, Amelia called the venue, only to be told that several of her guests' RSVPs had been rescinded. The catering list had been updated, apparently at the request of the bride's family contact, Evelyn. At first, Amelia couldn't believe it. There had to be a mistake. But when she checked the spreadsheet she shared with her planner, she found a version uploaded 2 days earlier with her friends' names quietly deleted, replaced by Evelyn's acquaintances. The betrayal wasn't just administrative, it was emotional. Her wedding, her dream, was being reshaped into Evelyn's social showcase. And the thought of smiling politely through it all made Amelia's chest ache. That night, she sat in the dark of her apartment, scrolling through the updated contracts. Her mind raced between rage and heartbreak. The caterer, the florist, the seating chart, all subtly altered. She could feel Evelyn's fingerprints on every detail. But in the chaos of reviewing line after line of fine print, something caught her attention, a clause buried in the catering agreement. It stated that any party who changes the guest count or venue details without written consent from both signatories forfeits the deposit and becomes liable for additional charges incurred due to rebooking. Amelia froze. The contract was in her name. The deposits were hers. But Evelyn had made those updates. And suddenly the pain shifted to something colder, sharper resolve. Amelia realized she didn't need to confront Evelyn to win. She could let the paperwork do the talking. In the days that followed, she began crafting her quiet counterattack. No shouting matches, no tears. Just calculated calm. She contacted the venue, not to confirm cancellations, but to initiate a transfer. There was a sister property, slightly smaller, but far more exclusive, available for the same weekend. With a few strategic emails and that same contract clause, she arranged for her entire event to move. When the new confirmation came through, Amelia smiled for the first time in weeks. She didn't need revenge through words. She'd have it through the moment Evelyn realized the entire guest list, catering setup, and location had shifted, right under her nose. And this time, Evelyn wouldn't be the family contact. She'd be the bill payer. Amelia didn't tell her fiancé, Ryan, yet. He adored his mother, and she didn't want to create conflict before the wedding. She simply said there were minor adjustments being made to improve the experience. He trusted her, as he always had. But Evelyn would soon learn that trust could be a double-edged sword. As Amelia finalized the new venue details, she felt a calm power settle over her. She wasn't the naive bride-to-be anymore. She was someone who had learned that grace and strategy could coexist. The invitations were reissued quietly. The florist was notified discreetly. Every vendor was told to refer all future communications directly to Amelia. And when Evelyn's next call to the hotel went unanswered, she had no idea the staff had been instructed to redirect her to the new venue she didn't even know existed yet. Amelia's plan was in motion. And as the calendar turned to the final week before the wedding, she watched Evelyn strut with confidence, unaware that her carefully constructed sabotage was about to collapse. The perfect day was still coming, only this time it would be Amelia's perfect day. But in her quiet satisfaction, Amelia hadn't yet realized how far Evelyn was willing to go to maintain control. The real battle for the wedding had only just begun. The following morning, Amelia woke with a sense of uneasy calm. Her coffee tasted sweeter than usual, perhaps because she knew something no one else did. The wedding had moved. The quiet satisfaction of her secret victory settled deep inside her like a warm ember. But beneath it all, she sensed the storm that was still gathering. Evelyn, meanwhile, was busy finalizing her own version of the event. She spent her morning on calls, issuing instructions to the old venue, micromanaging the floral arrangements, and confirming the seating plan she had personally altered. Every word she spoke carried a tone of authority, as though she were the one being celebrated, not her son and his bride. By afternoon, she had arranged for a private lunch with a few of her close friends. They gathered around a round table at her country club, sipping champagne and sharing gossip. Evelyn's lips curved into a satisfied smile as she spoke of how the wedding was coming together beautifully. She boasted about the exclusive guest list, dropping names that would impress the room. "I had to make some adjustments," she said casually. Some of Amelia's friends didn't quite fit the tone of the event. A family affair should reflect the family after all. Her friends nodded, impressed by her confidence and control. No one questioned her methods. No one knew that the foundation of her pride was already crumbling. That same day, Amelia spent hours confirming every final detail at the new venue. The hotel staff, thrilled to host such an elegant event, handled her requests with grace and efficiency. The ballroom was stunning. Ivory marble floors, towering chandeliers, and a terrace overlooking a garden of blooming roses. It was everything the first venue had promised, only more private and more secure. She took a moment to stand alone in the empty hall, imagining how it would look when the candles were lit and the soft hum of music filled the air. For the first time in months, she felt in control of her own story. Still, she knew Evelyn wouldn't stay quiet forever. The woman had a way of sniffing out secrets like a hound chasing a scent. It was only a matter of time before she realized that something had changed, but by then, it would be too late to fix it. 3 days before the wedding, the tension began to build. The old venue called Evelyn to confirm final headcounts, only to inform her that the bride had already handled the transfer. Evelyn froze mid-sentence. "Transfer?" she repeated sharply. "What transfer?" The coordinator explained that the event had been moved, same date, different location, per the bride's instruction, and that all deposits had been settled under the same contract terms. When Evelyn demanded to know how such a decision could have been made without her approval, she was met with a polite but firm reminder. "The signatory on the agreement is the bride, Mrs. Amelia Bennet. All changes required her consent only." For the first time in years, Evelyn felt her control slipping through her fingers. Her tone hardened. "I'll have to speak to her immediately," she said, ending the call abruptly. She dialed Amelia's number, but it rang unanswered. Then she called Ryan, who didn't yet know about the relocation. "Have you spoken to Amelia today?" she asked, her voice deceptively calm. "It seems the venue has been changed. Did she mention this to you?" Ryan, caught off guard, promised to ask her. But when he reached out to Amelia, she simply reassured him that everything was fine. "Just a small upgrade," she said softly. "You'll love it." Evelyn's unease deepened. She wasn't used to being left out of the loop. Every time she tried to intervene, she hit a polite wall of silence. The florist told her that Amelia had taken over the order. The caterer redirected her calls to Amelia's assistant. Even the seating chart had been locked out of her access. And then came the final blow, the invitations. Evelyn had insisted that she handle the delivery of the printed invitations weeks earlier, claiming it was tradition. What she didn't know was that Amelia had quietly reissued digital invites for the new venue to her own guest list, her friends included, while Evelyn's contacts never received the update. They would all arrive at the old location, expecting a grand celebration that no longer existed. As the wedding day approached, the old venue staff made their preparations as usual, unaware that their ballroom would remain empty. The tables were set, the linens pressed, and the flowers arranged exactly to Evelyn's specifications. But the guests who would appreciate them, Evelyn's chosen crowd, wouldn't see the inside of that room. Amelia's version of the wedding, however, was set to bloom elsewhere. She had coordinated every petal, every candle, every moment. Her friends were thrilled to have been re-invited, though she didn't share the details of what had happened. To them, it simply seemed like a glamorous venue change. To her, it was the quietest act of rebellion she had ever pulled. 2 nights before the ceremony, Evelyn decided to pay a visit to the original hotel, wanting to oversee the final setup herself. She walked through the lobby in her pressed cream blazer, heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. The concierge greeted her politely, but when she mentioned the Bennett wedding, the woman behind the desk hesitated. "Oh, that event has been moved, Mom," she said. "It's now at the Grand Rose Estate, just across town." Evelyn blinked. "The what?" The name hit her like a slap. The Grand Rose Estate, an exclusive venue known for its celebrity clientele and staggering costs. It was 3 times the price of the original booking. She knew that because she had inquired about it months ago and dismissed it as too extravagant. Her pulse quickened. "And who authorized that?" she demanded. The concierge smiled politely. "The bride, of course." Evelyn stood there, stunned into silence. She realized, with dawning horror, that she was no longer the puppeteer of this wedding. She was the fool who had underestimated her opponent. And then, as if the universe wanted to twist the knife, her phone pinged with an email notification, an updated invoice from the caterer. The subject line read "Additional costs, contract clause enforcement." Her hands trembled as she opened it. The message was clear. Due to unauthorized alterations and cancellations, the party responsible for the changes was liable for double the catering cost. And that party, according to their records, was Evelyn Monroe. Her heart sank. She had meddled one step too far. For the first time in years, she had no words, no schemes, no leverage. Just the weight of her own downfall resting heavily in her chest. As she walked out of the hotel that evening, her reflection in the glass doors looked smaller, older, diminished. She had lost control of the one thing she valued most, her image. And somewhere, Amelia was likely smiling, quiet and calm, knowing the power of paperwork had done what no confrontation ever could. But Evelyn wasn't finished yet. Pride, after all, doesn't surrender easily. She swore she would reclaim the narrative, even if it meant showing up uninvited to the new venue itself. The game wasn't over, not for her. And Amelia, though victorious for now, would soon discover that Evelyn's reach extended far beyond contracts and catering. Because when it came to control, some battles were fought not in ballrooms but in bloodlines. The morning sun rose like gold spilling across the sky, painting the hills beyond the city in soft hues of dawn. It was the day before the wedding, the calm before celebration. But for Amelia, that calm carried a current of anticipation. She had prepared for every detail, the timing of deliveries, the arrival of her friends, the arrangement of the ceremony chairs overlooking the garden. Every inch of the Grand Rose Estate felt like a victory reclaimed. Yet, even in her quiet triumph, she couldn't shake the faint unease that lingered beneath her chest, the sense that Evelyn would not accept defeat gracefully. Amelia knew her too well. Control was not just Evelyn's habit, it was her lifeblood. At that very moment, Evelyn sat in her living room surrounded by the scattered remnants of her failed plans. A floral catalog, a seating chart no one would use, and an unopened bottle of champagne meant for her perfect wedding dinner. Her mind was sharp, restless, unwilling to let go of what she saw as humiliation. How dared that girl move her son's wedding without consulting her? How dare she make her look foolish in front of her friends and the entire social circle she'd spent years cultivating? No, Evelyn thought coldly, this wasn't over. She poured herself a glass of wine even though it was barely noon. Her phone lay beside her on the table, open to the wedding planner's online portal. She scrolled through her contacts until she found what she was looking for, an old connection. Someone who owed her a favor at the city's event coordination office. It took her less than an hour to extract the address and logistical details of the new venue, the Grand Rose Estate. The very place she had once dismissed for being too costly, too ostentatious, and now it was Amelia's stage. Evelyn smirked. Let her think she's won, she murmured to herself. Tomorrow, everyone will know who truly runs this family. Meanwhile, at the estate, Amelia walked through the ballroom as decorators finished their work. White roses adorned every column, golden lanterns lined the path toward the reception area, and the tables shimmered under the soft gleam of crystal chandeliers. It was breathtaking. Her planner approached her with a gentle smile. Everything's coming together beautifully, she said. Your friends are all confirmed for tonight's rehearsal dinner. We've arranged extra seating just in case. Perfect, Amelia replied, her tone calm but determined. Let's make sure the entry list is checked twice. Only confirmed names get through the gate tomorrow. I want it quiet, secure, and drama-free. The planner nodded in understanding. She didn't need details. She's seen enough brides dealing with complicated families to read between the lines. That evening, as twilight fell over the estate, Amelia's closest friends arrived one by one, their laughter echoing softly across the terrace. The air was warm, the wine was sweet, and for the first time in months, Amelia felt surrounded by the people who truly loved her. She spoke to them warmly, though she kept the real story, the sabotage, the relocation, tucked safely behind a polite smile. To them, it was simply Amelia being her graceful self, hosting a stunning, exclusive celebration. But inside, Amelia was savoring every moment as justice unfolding quietly, elegantly, without a single raised voice. Yet, somewhere across town, Evelyn was dressing for an evening drive, her silk scarf tied neatly, her expression sharp as glass. She had decided she would drop by the Grand Rose Estate unannounced. She would frame it as a mother's concern, a gesture of goodwill. In truth, she needed to see it, to prove that this girl hadn't outsmarted her completely. She wanted to look Amelia in the eye and reclaim a sliver of her lost dominance. By the time Evelyn's car pulled up to the estate gates, the night had deepened. A faint mist hung over the gardens and fairy lights twinkled like constellations along the pathways. It was quieter than she expected, private, almost secretive. When the guard approached, she rolled down her window and spoke with practiced charm. Good evening, dear. I'm Evelyn Monroe, the groom's mother. I just wanted to check on the setup for tomorrow's wedding. The guard looked at his list, brows furrowing slightly. I'm sorry, ma'am, we only have clearance for specific names tonight. Rehearsal access is restricted. Evelyn's lips tightened. Surely there's been a mistake. This is my son's wedding. The guard hesitated, uncertain. Then, as if remembering his instructions, he politely replied, Ma'am, all directives came from the bride. If you like, I can call her assistant to confirm. Evelyn's pulse spiked. The thought of being checked for permission to enter her own son's wedding felt like an insult she couldn't bear. She forced a brittle smile. That won't be necessary. I'll return in the morning. She reversed her car slowly, fury simmering behind her composed expression. Inside, Amelia watched from the upper terrace. She had seen the headlights, recognized the familiar car, and quietly observed the short exchange at the gate. Her heart thudded once, heavy and slow. She had expected this. Evelyn's inability to stay away, her instinct to assert control, even when control had already slipped from her grasp. But Amelia didn't feel fear anymore. Only clarity. She turned to the planner beside her. Tighten the entry list further. No exceptions tomorrow. If anyone arrives unlisted, redirect them to security immediately. Understood, the planner said. Amelia looked out at the sweeping view of the estate, the illuminated garden, the soft hum of music drifting through the air, and allowed herself a rare smile. Tomorrow, she whispered, is going to be beautiful. But as the final preparations carried on through the night, another force was stirring in silence. Evelyn had returned home, pacing in her grand hallway, her phone in hand. She had one more move left, one last attempt to turn humiliation into triumph. She began calling her contacts again, summoning old acquaintances, framing her story carefully. That she had been excluded by a spiteful bride, that plans had been changed without notice, that she needed support to set things right. And as the hours passed, her web began to weave itself once more, quiet, invisible, but spreading. By the next morning, whispers had already reached some of the family guests who hadn't received the new invitation. Confusion was growing. The old venue staff, still preparing for an event that would never happen, fielded calls from bewildered attendees. The news of the venue change was traveling too fast. Evelyn's pride might have been wounded, but she had turned that pain into something else. Strategy. If she couldn't control the wedding, she could at least control the story. And as Amelia slept soundly that night, dreaming of her long-awaited peace, Evelyn's plan was already taking shape in the shadows. The battle had shifted. The wedding was no longer just a celebration of love. It was becoming a stage for exposure, manipulation, and revenge. The morning of the wedding dawned with a golden calm that seemed almost deceptive. The grand rose estate shimmered under the early light, dew glistening on the manicured lawns, ribbons swaying softly in the breeze, and the scent of roses drifting across the air. It was the kind of morning Amelia had always dreamed of, peaceful, elegant, full of quiet promise. She stood before the tall mirror in her suite, the final touches of her makeup being carefully applied. Her reflection looked serene, but beneath that calm exterior, her heart beat with a strange rhythm, a blend of relief and apprehension. Today was the culmination of months of struggle, secrecy, and silent endurance. Today was supposed to be hers. Downstairs, the staff moved with clockwork precision. The florists made final adjustments to the archway, the catering team laid out the reception tables, and soft music played from the string quartet rehearsing in the courtyard. It was perfection, fragile, golden perfection. But perfection has a way of attracting disruption. Across town, Evelyn was already dressed. Her pearl necklace gleamed against her neckline, and her hat, the one she'd chosen weeks ago for the big day, sat perfectly angled. But her face, once proud and composed, bore a storm behind its polished calm. The humiliation of being turned away at the gate the previous night had burned into her like a brand. This morning, she wasn't just attending a wedding. She was reclaiming her dignity, or so she told herself. Her phone had buzzed nonstop since dawn. Confused relatives, uninvited friends, and distant acquaintances all asking the same thing. Where is the wedding actually happening? Evelyn had given them her version of the truth, that Amelia made last-minute changes without consulting anyone. And with each retelling, her tone grew more confident, more wounded, more performative. By 9 a.m., she had gathered a small entourage of her loyal circle, women from her social club and extended relatives who sympathized with her supposed plight. Together, they set off toward the Grand Rose Estate, a convoy of polished cars gliding down the road like a declaration of war dressed in satin. Back at the estate, Amelia's world was serene for now. Her bridesmaids fussed over her gown, laughter echoing through the suite as they prepared for the ceremony. Her phone was off, her mind focused. The planner moved discreetly in and out, updating her on the progress below. The guests arriving, the musicians taking their places, the photographers setting up. Everything was unfolding like a perfectly orchestrated symphony. Then came the first ripple. At exactly 10:23 a.m., the head of security received a call from the front gate. A group of unexpected guests had arrived, demanding immediate entry. The guard's voice, calm but strained, filtered through the planner's walkie-talkie. They're insisting they belong to the family. The lead woman says she's the groom's mother. The planner's expression shifted slightly. She excused herself from Amelia's suite, moving swiftly through the hallways toward the front. When she reached the entrance, she saw Evelyn, poised and smiling thinly, standing beside her car, surrounded by half a dozen guests who clearly weren't on the list. "Good morning," Evelyn said coolly, holding out her invitation like a weapon. "We're here for my son's wedding." "There seems to be some confusion about our clearance." The planner, ever professional, returned a diplomatic smile. "Good morning, Mrs. Monroe. The guest list was finalized by the bride yesterday. I don't seem to have these additional names. Let me check with her assistant." Evelyn's lips curved in a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "No need for that, dear. I'm sure Amelia simply forgot to update you." But her tone carried a challenge, not a request. The planner, sensing the tension, decided to stall. She asked the guards to escort Evelyn and her party to the waiting lounge just inside the gate. Evelyn agreed with a nod, but her mind was already racing. Her goal wasn't just to attend, it was to make an entrance. Inside, as Amelia walked toward the window, she noticed the commotion by the main drive. The sight of the familiar car, sleek, silver, and unmistakably Evelyn's, made her stomach tighten. So it had begun. Her instinct was to panic, but she steadied herself. She'd known Evelyn wouldn't surrender quietly. This confrontation was inevitable. It was just happening sooner than she had hoped. She called for her planner, who arrived moments later. Amelia's voice was low, steady, but her eyes were sharp. "Don't let her disrupt the ceremony. If she wants to come in, she can, but she follows my rules. No additional guests, no interference, no speeches." The planner nodded firmly. "Understood." Downstairs, Evelyn's patience was wearing thin. She had spent the last 15 minutes sipping complimentary champagne and scanning the lobby, noting every elegant detail with thinly veiled resentment. It infuriated her that Amelia had managed to secure such a breathtaking location, one she herself had once deemed out of reach. Finally, the planner returned, maintaining her professional composure. "Mrs. Monroe, the bride has approved your entry. The additional guests, however, will need to wait outside until space allows." Evelyn's jaw tightened. "They're family," she said, her voice low. "You expect me to walk in without them?" "I'm afraid those are the bride's instructions," came the calm reply. For a brief moment, Evelyn's expression cracked, a flash of anger in her eyes. But she caught herself quickly, adjusted her hat, and gave a brittle smile. "Very well," she said. "Let's not ruin the day, shall we?" As she walked through the courtyard toward the ceremony, her heels clicking sharply against the marble, the eyes of guests followed her. Some whispered. Some looked away. Evelyn felt every glance like a sting, but she held her posture high, refusing to give Amelia the satisfaction of seeing her ruffled. The ceremony began just after noon. The guests rose as Amelia appeared at the top of the garden steps, radiant in her ivory gown, her veil catching the light like spun glass. The music swelled softly. Ryan's face lit up as he saw her, all tension melting away. And for a brief transcendent moment, all the chaos faded. The sabotage, the conflict, the endless tug-of-war, it all disappeared in the glow of that singular moment of love. Even Evelyn, seated rigidly in the front row, felt a flicker of hesitation. The sight of her son's happiness disarmed her more than she expected. For the first time in weeks, she didn't feel in control, but she also didn't feel entirely angry. Perhaps deep down, she realized this love, was what the day was meant to be about all along. But just as the vows began, one of Evelyn's uninvited friends, who had managed to sneak through the side entrance, appeared at the back of the garden. Whispering spread like wildfire. The planner moved quickly, signaling security. The guards discreetly guided the woman out, but not before a few guests turned their heads, murmuring in confusion. The disruption was minor, over in moments, but it left a mark. Amelia's gaze flicked briefly toward Evelyn, and their eyes met. For the first time, no words were needed. The air between them carried a silent truth. This wedding wasn't a battleground anymore. It was a reckoning. The ceremony ended beautifully despite the interruption. Applause rose through the garden as Amelia and Ryan kissed beneath the archway of roses. The moment was pure, untainted, a quiet victory sealed in the open air. But as the guests moved toward the reception hall, Evelyn stayed seated, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Around her, the world was celebrating, but she was lost in thought, not in anger this time, but in reflection. She had fought for control, and in doing so, she had lost something far more valuable: respect, trust, connection. The realization settled heavily in her chest. Still, she wasn't ready to apologize. Pride, after all, dies slowly. And though Amelia believed the battle was over, the aftermath, the delicate politics of family, the whispers among guests, the quiet wounds left unspoken, was only beginning to unfold. The war had ended, yes, but peace would take longer. The ceremony was over, but the story of the day had only begun to unfold. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, the grand Rose estate transformed from a vision of serene romance into a glittering celebration. Strings of lights twinkled across the courtyard, chandeliers cast a golden glow inside the ballroom, and soft jazz echoed through the air. Guests mingled with champagne in hand, their laughter rising like the hum of a well-tuned orchestra. Plates of delicately arranged hors d'oeuvres floated past on silver trays, and the scent of roses mixed with the sweetness of vanilla and wine. Amelia stood near the head table, her gown now trailing lightly across the marble floor as she greeted guests, her smile radiant but measured. Her heart should have been full. The ceremony had gone beautifully. Yet there was a lingering unease she couldn't shake. She knew Evelyn wouldn't stay quiet for long. A woman like her didn't surrender publicly, not without a final act. And Amelia's instincts were right. Across the ballroom, Evelyn sat surrounded by a small cluster of sympathetic guests, her friends from the social club who had managed to charm their way in after the ceremony ended. They leaned close, whispering and exchanging looks, their smiles tight and knowing. Evelyn kept her voice low, but the confidence had returned to her tone. "Did you see the floral arch? She spent a fortune trying to outdo me," she said with a faint smirk. "It's sweet, really, all this effort just to make a statement." Her friend leaned in. "You must feel vindicated, dear. After everything she's put you through." Evelyn sipped her wine delicately. "Vindicated?" she murmured. "Not yet. But the evening is young." The waiter passed by, offering another glass. Evelyn accepted it, her mind already worrying. She had overheard bits of conversation, murmurs from relatives confused about the venue change, distant cousins who had shown up late and been turned away at the gates. The narrative was forming itself. All she needed was the right audience. She began her subtle campaign. Moving gracefully between groups, she dropped well-timed remarks about how the bride changed plans without notice, how certain family members were excluded, and how unfortunate it was that so many couldn't attend. Each phrase was sugar-coated in sympathy, but underneath it was poison, slow, strategic, and deliberate. Amelia, meanwhile, was unaware that the gossip had begun to swirl like invisible smoke through the crowd. She was too busy greeting guests, keeping the evening flowing smoothly, her laughter light and practiced. But the first sign reached her in the form of a distant cousin's comment. "I almost didn't find the place," the woman said with a polite laugh. "Your mother-in-law told us there was some confusion with the invitations." "You poor thing, it must have been so stressful for you." Amelia's smile froze for half a second, then returned, softer, more careful. "Just a little change in plans," she replied smoothly. "Everything worked out beautifully though, didn't it?" The cousin nodded, oblivious to the flicker in Amelia's eyes. Amelia excused herself quietly and made her way toward the far end of the hall, where she could see Evelyn standing near the dessert table, the center of yet another whispering circle. Her heart sank, but she refused to cause a scene, not today. Instead, she observed from a distance, calm but calculating. She had learned something important about Evelyn over the past months. Confrontation only gave her power. Silence, on the other hand, made her unravel. The dinner began soon after, elegant and seamless. The waiters moved like a practiced ballet, serving each course in rhythm with the music. The speeches started, brief, heartfelt, and safe. The best man spoke of loyalty and friendship. Amelia's maid of honor delivered a touching message about love and strength. And then, to everyone's surprise, Evelyn rose from her chair. A hush fell over the room. The microphone, resting near the edge of the stage, suddenly seemed far too close to her. Amelia's stomach tightened. Evelyn smiled at the crowd, her posture perfect, her voice smooth and commanding. "I just want to say a few words," she began, as the proud mother of the groom. Ryan glanced at Amelia nervously, but she gave a small nod, a silent permission, though her pulse quickened. Evelyn continued, "Weddings are about family. About unity, respect, and the joining of two people and their worlds." Her tone was warm at first, even gracious. "Today has been beautiful truly, though it wasn't easy getting here, was it?" A few murmurs rippled through the crowd. Amelia's breath caught. Evelyn's eyes glimmered as she went on. "There were some misunderstandings, of course. Plans changed, people left out, venues moved, but in the end love prevailed. And that's what matters, isn't it?" The words were carefully crafted, each one laced with insinuation. The kind of statement that left listeners wondering, questioning, whispering. Amelia stood still, her hands resting lightly on the edge of the table. She didn't flinch, didn't break. She let the silence stretch a moment longer, then smiled, calm, luminous, unshaken. As Evelyn handed back the microphone and returned to her seat, Amelia rose gracefully. The guests turned toward her, expecting tension, perhaps even retaliation. But what they saw instead was composure personified. "I couldn't agree more," Amelia said softly, her voice carrying just enough to fill the room. "Family is everything. And sometimes, family teaches us the most important lessons about patience, about grace, and about knowing when to let go." The crowd applauded politely. It wasn't loud, but it was steady enough to reclaim the moment. Evelyn's expression faltered ever so slightly. The rest of the evening unfolded like a dance of quiet power. Amelia's calmness disarmed every whisper, every questioning look. The guests soon returned to laughter and conversation, the tension fading into the music. But Evelyn sat in silence, her drink untouched, her smile brittle. Her plan to reclaim dignity through manipulation had crumbled in the face of composure she couldn't match. And as the final toast was made, as Amelia and Ryan shared their first dance under the chandelier's glow, Evelyn watched from her corner, unseen but deeply aware that she had lost more than control. She had lost presence. Her voice, once dominant, was now reduced to background noise in a story that no longer belonged to her. Later that night, when the guests began to leave and the music softened, Amelia slipped out into the garden alone. The air was cool, scented with jasmine. The fairy light shimmered faintly against the dark sky. She closed her eyes, breathing deeply, letting the exhaustion melt away. She had survived, not through confrontation, but through quiet power. Behind her, through the glass windows of the ballroom, Evelyn lingered for one last moment. Her eyes met Amelia's from afar. Neither woman smiled. Neither spoke. But for the first time, Evelyn looked away first. The battle for the wedding was over. Yet deep inside both of them, something had shifted, something unspoken, but permanent. The war between pride and peace had drawn its line. And though the night ended in applause and beauty, the echoes of that silent war would linger long after the lights went out. The morning after the wedding arrived wrapped in silence. The storm of celebration had passed, leaving behind a trail of wilted flowers, scattered champagne flutes, and the faint echo of laughter fading into memory. The Grand Rose estate was peaceful now, too peaceful. The staff moved quietly, clearing away evidence of a night that had shimmered with light and tension in equal measure. But while the venue exhaled in calm, the real aftermath was just beginning to ripple through the lives of those who had attended. Amelia sat on the balcony of her suite, still wearing the silk robe she'd been gifted by her bridesmaids. Her hair was loosely tied, her face bare, her gaze distant. Below her, the gardens gleamed with dew. The world looked perfect again, as though nothing had happened. But inside she felt the exhaustion of months of quiet war. Ryan entered the room, his tie undone, his steps hesitant. He looked at her the way a man looks at something he doesn't quite understand, not because of fear, but because of awe. "You did it," he said softly. "Yesterday was incredible." Amelia smiled faintly but didn't answer. He didn't know the full truth, and she didn't plan to tell him. Not about the sabotage, not about the invoices, not about the contract clause that had made Evelyn pay double for her interference. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about peace, the kind that comes from reclaiming control without losing grace. But peace, Amelia knew, doesn't last long in families like theirs. A few miles away, Evelyn sat at her dining table, surrounded by stacks of paperwork. The morning light was cruel. It made every crease on her face, every shadow under her eyes, seem sharper. The housekeeper had brought her tea, but it had gone cold untouched. In front of her lay the catering bill, the revised one. The total was nearly double what she'd originally expected, complete with penalties and rebooking fees. And at the bottom, in tidy print, was the clause she had unknowingly triggered. "Lenny, modifications or cancellations requested without written consent from both contractual parties shall result in forfeiture of deposits and full assumption of reallocation costs." It was the fine print she had ignored, the fine print Amelia had seen. Evelyn's fingers tightened on the paper. Her jaw clenched as she reread it, again and again, trying to find a loophole. But there wasn't one. The estate, the catering, the vendors, all of it had been tied to Amelia's signature, not hers. And yet, because she had inserted herself into those communications, the liability had quietly shifted to her. She had sabotaged herself. The irony was bitter. She had spent months manipulating contracts, calls, and people, only to be undone by her own interference. It wasn't the bride who had embarrassed her. It was the paperwork. Evelyn leaned back in her chair, staring at the chandelier above her table, the same one she'd once proudly installed to elevate her home. It now glimmered mockingly, reminding her of how control had once felt like safety, but now felt like a cage. Over the next week, whispers spread through their extended family like wildfire. Everyone had a version of what had really happened. Some said Amelia moved the venue because of weather complications. Others claimed Evelyn had tried to control the event and got caught in her own scheme. A few said the bride had outsmarted her mother-in-law through some clever legal twist. Evelyn said nothing. She neither confirmed nor denied the rumors. Her pride, though fractured, still held her tongue. But the social circles she once commanded no longer looked at her with admiration, only curiosity. Her name had become a whispered cautionary tale, a reminder of what happens when power games go too far. Meanwhile, Amelia and Ryan returned from their brief honeymoon a week later, stepping into their new apartment, quiet, modern, and free of Evelyn's design touches. Amelia unpacked slowly, one item at a time, each motion deliberate. The war had left its mark, not in scars, but in lessons. She had learned that silence could be strength, that kindness could coexist with strategy, and that revenge didn't need to be loud to be complete. As she arranged the framed wedding photo on their shelf, one of her and Ryan laughing beneath a rain of petals, she noticed Evelyn's expression in the background. She wasn't smiling, she was watching, always watching. It struck Amelia that Evelyn's punishment was already unfolding, not through confrontation, but through isolation. For someone like her, being excluded was the deepest wound of all. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived. It came in an expensive ivory envelope, handwritten, sealed with a faint scent of jasmine, Evelyn's perfume. Amelia hesitated before opening it. The handwriting was elegant, but slightly uneven, as though written through hesitation or pride. Amelia, the wedding was beautiful. You were beautiful. I suppose I underestimated you, not out of malice, but perhaps because I believed too strongly in my own ways. I won't apologize for caring about my son, but I will admit that I interfered where I shouldn't have. You've made your point quite clearly, perhaps too clearly. The invoices came. I've paid them. Consider it closed. I hope in time we'll learn to coexist, not as opponents but as family. Evelyn Amelia read it twice. The words weren't warm, but they weren't cruel either. For Evelyn, this was as close to an apology as the world would ever get. She folded the letter neatly and placed it in a drawer. Not out of bitterness, but out of understanding. She didn't need to respond. Some things didn't need words to end. That night, as Amelia sat on the balcony with Ryan, the city lights stretching endlessly before them, she thought about the strange symmetry of it all. How a single act of sabotage had unraveled years of Evelyn's control, and how a single clause in a contract had rewritten the balance of their relationship forever. It wasn't revenge anymore, it was resolution. Evelyn had learned the price of control. Amelia had learned the value of boundaries. And though peace between them would always feel fragile, it was finally possible because both women in their own ways had been forced to change. Yet, somewhere in Evelyn's grand house, another letter sat unfinished on her desk, one addressed not to Amelia but to a lawyer. Her pride wasn't entirely gone. It had just learned to move more quietly. And while the paperwork might have closed the chapter, Evelyn's story was far from over. Because when control slips away from a woman who built her world upon it, it doesn't end in silence. It ends in reinvention. Months passed after the wedding, and life slowly began to settle, at least on the surface. Amelia and Ryan had fallen into a quiet rhythm in their new home. The morning coffee together, late-night movies on the couch, laughter echoing through the apartment. These were the small luxuries Amelia had longed for after months of emotional exhaustion. The chaos of the wedding had faded into distant memory for most people, replaced by the ordinary conversations of married life. Yet, beneath the calm exterior, there remained an invisible thread tying Amelia to Evelyn, a bond that neither affection nor distance could sever. Evelyn, meanwhile, had retreated into silence. To the outside world, she appeared unchanged, elegant, composed, and as socially active as ever. She still attended her luncheons, hosted small gatherings, and presented herself as the matriarch she had always been. But those close to her noticed a shift. Her laughter came less often, her words were fewer, her smile slightly strained. Her reputation had taken a quiet blow after the wedding. Those in her circle no longer saw her as the untouchable figure she once was. Whispers of the mother-in-law scandal lingered faintly behind closed doors. No one said it outright, but everyone knew. For Evelyn, humiliation was a wound that festered in silence. And silent wounds, left unchecked, have a way of turning into plans. It began subtly, a conversation with her attorney under the pretense of estate planning. She wanted to ensure her assets, her family home, and her wealth would be protected properly. The lawyer, unaware of her underlying motives, simply took notes and asked about beneficiaries. Evelyn's voice was calm as she replied, "Naturally, my son Ryan will inherit most of it. But I want conditions. Certain clauses that protect the estate in case of outside influence." The lawyer raised an eyebrow. "Outside influence, ma'am?" Evelyn smiled thinly. "Marriage can complicate things," the man nodded, making his notes without question. But Evelyn's mind was already weaving a plan more intricate than simple inheritance distribution. If Amelia wanted to use contracts as weapons, then Evelyn would learn the same game. She would make the law her ally. Her idea was simple but cunning, a trust, one that would secure Ryan, as inheritance but make it inaccessible should marital discord ever arise or should his spouse attempt to exert financial control. In essence, it was a financial cage dressed as protection. The lawyer, still oblivious to her intent, began drafting the documents. Evelyn's heart pulsed with renewed energy. Control, it was returning, even if only on paper. Meanwhile, Amelia had her own battles to face. Married life with Ryan was loving, yes, but not without friction. He adored her, but he was still tethered to his mother's influence, even when he tried not to be. Evelyn's calls came regularly, polite at first, then increasingly inquisitive. She asked about their finances, their plans to buy a house, even hinted about grandchildren. Each conversation left Amelia with a familiar ache, the feeling of being observed, judged, maneuvered. One evening, as she and Ryan shared dinner, her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. The message was brief. Did you know your husband's inheritance is now bound to a trust? You might want to ask who's behind it. Her heart stopped for a beat. There was no signature, but the implication was clear. She set the phone down, her pulse quickening. Ryan noticed. Everything okay? Amelia hesitated. Just something odd. I'll tell you later. That night, after he had fallen asleep, she sat alone on the balcony, the city glowing faintly in the distance. The message replayed in her mind. If it was true, Evelyn was still playing her games, this time not with weddings or guests, but with legacies, and this game was more dangerous. Because now, it wasn't about pride, it was about power. Days later, Amelia made a quiet decision. She called the family's financial advisor under the guise of updating their own joint account. But as the conversation progressed, she steered it gently toward the subject she truly cared about. I've been hearing that some changes were made to Ryan's inheritance trust, she said casually. I just wanted to be sure everything's in order. There was a pause on the other end. Then the advisor cleared his throat. Yes, Mrs. Bennet, there have been recent amendments. Standard estate restructuring, from what I understand. Amelia smiled faintly. Standard? Yes. Mrs. Monroe set up a protective clause to ensure longevity of the assets. It's a common practice. But Amelia heard what he didn't say, the word control hiding behind protective. After the call ended, she sat in silence. Her thoughts were cold, steady, sharp. She had learned from the wedding that confrontation with Evelyn never yielded results. If Evelyn was moving in silence again, then Amelia would do the same. But this time she wouldn't just react, she would anticipate. Weeks passed. Ryan began noticing the subtle tension between the two women, the polite conversations that carried invisible daggers, the phone calls that ended too quickly, the way Amelia's tone changed whenever Evelyn's name was mentioned. He tried to mediate, but both women were too skilled in their quiet warfare. To Evelyn's face, Amelia remained warm and respectful, even offering to help with paperwork for future estate matters. Evelyn, ever the strategist, saw this as naive. She smiled and handed over some documents, never suspecting that Amelia had already learned how to read between legal lines. Because Amelia wasn't just the bride who fought back anymore. She had evolved. One evening as Ryan worked late, she sat at her desk reading through the trust drafts Evelyn had so confidently shared. The language was meticulous, but she caught it, a loophole buried deep within the clauses. In the event that the beneficiary's spouse contributes significantly to the estate's value through financial, legal, or operational involvement, said spouse may be considered a co-beneficiary at the trustee's discretion. It was a small line, but to Amelia, it was gold. All she had to do was contribute, visibly legally, to the estate's affairs. And the control Evelyn had so carefully built around her son's inheritance would begin to unravel from within. The next morning, Amelia smiled when she saw Evelyn's name flash on her phone. Good morning, Mother, she said, her tone calm, poised. Evelyn paused, momentarily caught off guard by the warmth. Amelia, I wanted to discuss something with you about Ryan's future, about the family estate. Oh, absolutely, Amelia said smoothly. In fact, I've been reviewing some of the documents myself. I'd love to be involved. It's such a legacy to preserve. For the first time, Evelyn's silence carried the faintest hint of unease. Because she knew the tone of a woman who wasn't begging for approval anymore, but positioning herself to take power gracefully, quietly, legally. And this time, Evelyn realized she wasn't facing a bride. She was facing an equal. The wedding war had been about pride, but the inheritance trap was about control. And both women were now playing it with elegance sharpened into steel. The first frost of winter had arrived by the time the next chapter of their silent war began. Outside Evelyn's grand estate, the garden stood still, roses withered, fountains frozen in delicate stillness. Inside, warmth glowed from chandeliers and polished floors, but the air carried something colder than the season itself, the tension of two women locked in quiet combat. Evelyn sat in her study, reviewing documents by the firelight. The trust papers lay open before her, signed and sealed, the tangible manifestation of her control. Every clause, every condition, every elegant paragraph was designed to protect her vision of legacy. She felt comforted by their weight. Paper had always obeyed her better than people. She believed she had outmaneuvered Amelia again. But what Evelyn didn't know was that the very paper she trusted most was already beginning to turn against her. Amelia had spent the past several weeks embedding herself into the family's financial and property affairs, all with grace and patience. She'd volunteered to handle administrative details for Ryan, tax filings, renovation quotes, and even property management for the estate's rental wing. Each email, each signature, each approved invoice added her footprint to the financial system Evelyn believed she ruled. By law, she was now recorded as an operational contributor to the estate. And that small line, that overlooked clause tucked away in the trust, meant that if anything were to happen to Evelyn, or if the trustees reviewed her documented contributions, Amelia could be deemed a co-beneficiary. The very weapon Evelyn built to cage Amelia was slowly crowning her instead. It began to show in small ways. Evelyn would receive routine financial reports and notice Amelia's name on joint approvals. Authorized by Mrs. Amelia Bennett. At first, she dismissed it as clerical formality. Then, it began appearing more frequently. Her irritation simmered quietly, like an ember buried under ash. One morning she called Ryan. "Darling, I noticed Amelia's been very involved lately. Is everything all right?" Ryan, oblivious to the undertones, smiled through the phone. "She's been incredible, Mother. I'm finally on top of things thanks to her." Evelyn's lips pressed together. "Yes, I'm sure she's efficient." After the call, she stared at the trust papers again, uneasy. Her reflection in the polished desk looked older than she remembered, not just in age, but in energy. It struck her that Amelia wasn't just reacting anymore. She was building. The next Sunday, Evelyn hosted one of her signature luncheons, a subtle return to social life after months of post-wedding retreat. The house gleamed. Silver polished, table linens pressed, laughter echoing through the halls again. Amelia attended, wearing a soft gray dress and a quiet smile. She greeted every guest with warmth, her presence gentle yet commanding in its own right. Evelyn watched her from across the table, analyzing every move, every word. When the talk turned toward property investments, an old favorite topic among Evelyn's circle, Amelia spoke up. "Oh, the Monroe estate is remarkable," she said, turning toward the guests. "We've begun discussing renovations for the north wing. The maintenance costs have been higher than expected, but I think modernizing it could increase long-term value significantly." The room grew attentive. Evelyn froze. "We've?" She repeated softly, her smile taut. Amelia turned to her with practiced calm. "Yes, Ryan and I have been reviewing the estate's accounts. He thought it best that I oversee some of the updates." The guests looked between them, unaware of the quiet war playing out beneath the politeness. Evelyn laughed, just a little too loudly. Of course, dear, you've always had such initiative. Her tone carried honey, but her eyes were steel. Inside, she was boiling. The estate had always been her symbol of control, her legacy. And now this woman, this smiling, serene interloper, was planting her flag within its walls, brick by brick. That night, when the guests were gone and silence returned, Evelyn poured herself a drink and stood by the window. Snow had begun to fall, soft and soundless. She watched the flakes land on the garden hedges she designed decades ago, symbols of permanence, order, tradition. But Amelia's voice lingered in her head. We've begun discussing renovations. It felt like erosion, not of stone or wealth, but of power. Meanwhile, Amelia sat at home with a stack of papers spread across the dining table, tax forms, maintenance invoices, trustee letters. Ryan was out meeting a client, leaving her alone in the quiet rhythm of her strategy. Her phone buzzed. A message from the family's accountant noted your operational oversight for the Monroe estate. Updating records to include your signature authority for the renovation project. Amelia smiled faintly. It was done. The more Evelyn tried to keep her locked out, the more the legal framework pulled her in. Every approval, every update, every action she took made her role permanent, unshakable. And yet Amelia didn't do it out of greed. It wasn't about the money, it was about balance. About never again being a spectator in her own life. For her, the paper crown wasn't for vanity, it was armor. Weeks later, Evelyn called for a meeting with her lawyer. She needed reassurance, to feel the comfort of her control restored. The lawyer, an older man with thin spectacles, greeted her with his usual calm professionalism. Mrs. Monroe, I reviewed the latest filings. Everything appears in order. The trust remains secure. Evelyn exhaled with relief. And Amelia? He looked down at his notes. Mrs. Bennet has been active in estate management, yes. Which, under Section 7B, technically qualifies her as a co-beneficiary. Evelyn blinked. I beg your pardon? He adjusted his glasses. It's merely procedural, ma'am. She doesn't control funds. But her contributions grant her limited authority, co-authorization rights, technically speaking. Her breath caught, the room tilting slightly in her vision. Limited authority, she repeated quietly. Over my estate? The lawyer hesitated. Over certain operational functions. But yes. On paper she now shares that title. Evelyn stared at the papers in silence. The legal ink gleamed faintly under the lamplight. Her name, once solitary, now paired beside Amelia's. It was as if the walls around her had begun to shift. Her empire hadn't been stolen. It had been rewritten, line by line, signature by signature, clause by clause, by a woman who smiled through every storm. That night, Evelyn burned with quiet fury, not the theatrical kind, but the deep, exhausted anger of someone realizing they had been outplayed by their own rules. She thought back to the wedding, the catering contract, the venue change, the way Amelia had turned Sabotage into advantage. And now this, the inheritance trap turned crown. It dawned on her that Amelia wasn't dismantling her world through rebellion. She was doing it through refinement, precision, grace, the kind of power Evelyn had always admired in herself, and now unwillingly recognized in another. Inside the envelope was a single letter, handwritten in Evelyn's perfect script. You've learned the game well. But remember, dear, crowns made of paper burn easily. Amelia read it once, then smiled. She folded it gently and slipped it into the same drawer that held Evelyn's last letter. Maybe, she murmured to herself. But only if you're foolish enough to set them on fire. The snow outside fell in silence. And somewhere in that stillness, two queens, one aging, one ascending, continued to rule their world, each convinced the other would blink first. Spring returned quietly, carrying with it the illusion of renewal. The gardens at the Monroe estate began to bloom again, tulips in pale yellow, roses in soft blush, lilacs filling the air with sweetness. Yet, within the house, behind heavy curtains and polished walls, a different kind of growth was taking place, the steady, calculated expansion of a woman's influence. Amelia had learned that power did not always come from confrontation. It came from consistency, the kind that left no visible fingerprints, only results. She didn't gloat, she didn't boast, and she didn't challenge Evelyn openly. Instead, she worked quietly through systems Evelyn once believed she controlled. Each passing month added another layer of legitimacy to her role, another signature, another joint decision, another subtle acknowledgement that she was no longer an outsider. The Monroe name was still Evelyn's, but the operations, the trust, the paperwork, those were slowly becoming Amelia's domain. And yet, beneath Amelia's calm control, there was something fragile, a small, lingering ache she rarely allowed herself to feel. She didn't want war anymore. She wanted peace. But peace requires surrender, and neither woman in this family had ever known how to yield. Evelyn had been watching. She watched the reports come in with Amelia's name attached. She watched her sunbeam whenever his wife handled matters he never could. She watched her friends whisper when they realized Amelia now represented the estate at charity functions. Each observation felt like a needle under her skin. And yet, she was careful not to act too soon. Her pride had already cost her once. This time, she would strike with precision, not through sabotage but through reflection. For Evelyn, mirrors had always been metaphors. They revealed truth but also offered distortion, depending on where one stood. And so she decided to create one, a mirror of Amelia's own strategy. She called her lawyer again, but this time she didn't speak of trusts or inheritance. She spoke of contingency frameworks. It sounded harmless, bureaucratic even. But hidden in her request was a new weapon, a clause that would tether Amelia's newfound power back to Evelyn's approval. The proposal was subtle, so subtle that even the lawyer didn't sense its full intent at first. Evelyn requested a reflective governance condition to be added to the estate's legal framework. If found misaligned with the estate's vision, their authority could be suspended pending review. It was a mirror of Amelia's control, polished, elegant, and dangerous. Evelyn called it the mirror clause. Her reasoning was simple. If Amelia wanted to play within her system, she would now have to play by her reflections. When the paperwork was finalized and quietly inserted into the estate's legal records, Evelyn felt something she hadn't felt in months: relief. She had found a way to restore balance, to remind Amelia who still sat at the head of the table. But like every reflection, the image was deceptive. For mirrors do not just reflect, they also reveal. Because what Evelyn hadn't considered was that Amelia had been expecting a countermove all along. Weeks later, Evelyn hosted another gathering at the estate, a spring charity luncheon. Guests arrived dressed in florals and pearls, laughter and light spilling through the air. The event was flawless, down to the last canape. But it was Amelia, not Evelyn, who made the welcome speech. Evelyn had agreed to let her do it, under the guise of shared representation. Yet, as Amelia spoke from the balcony overlooking the gardens, it became clear that this wasn't just a speech, it was a subtle display of authority. She spoke of family legacy, of stewardship, of shared vision and transparency. Her tone was soft, her words warm, yet every sentence mirrored Evelyn's own philosophy back to her, polished and updated for a new generation. Evelyn listened from below, expression unreadable, though her grip on her glass tightened slightly with each sentence. The crowd applauded at the end, moved and impressed, seeing in Amelia the modern successor the Monroe estate deserved. But Evelyn didn't clap. She only smiled. A slow, deliberate, knowing smile. Or so Evelyn thought. The following week, a courier arrived at Evelyn's estate with a sealed letter from the family trustees. The handwriting was unmistakable, formal, careful, official. She opened it calmly, expecting confirmation that the review had been logged. But as her eyes scanned the letter, Her expression changed. Per the governance charter, the mirror clause has been filed. However, as both co-beneficiaries hold equal operational status, all reviews must be jointly conducted and mutually signed by both parties. In short, Mrs. Bennet will be required to review Mrs. Monroe's governance as well. Evelyn's breath caught. She read the line again, twice then a third time, before sinking back into her chair. The irony cut deeper than any insult. The mirror she had built to reflect her control had turned back toward her. The clause she crafted to restrain Amelia now restrained her as well. When she read it, she smiled faintly, not with triumph, but with a quiet sense of inevitability. Evelyn's move had been predictable, necessary even. It was what kept the balance alive between them. Later that evening, she visited Evelyn at the estate. The visit was polite, even cordial. They sat across from each other in the sunroom. Tea between them, the silence heavy but civilized. "It's been an interesting week," Amelia said softly. "It seems we're both responsible for each other now." Evelyn met her gaze, unflinching. "Seems that way. Perhaps it's better this way," Amelia continued. "Checks and balances. A legacy managed through mutual respect." Evelyn's eyes narrowed slightly. "Respect is a word people use when they can't say control." Amelia's lips curved. "And control," she replied gently, "is what people use when they've forgotten respect." The silence that followed was thick, not with anger, but with understanding. For the first time, there was no mask between them, just two women, mirrors of one another, both powerful in their own way, both unwilling to fall. That night, after Amelia left, Evelyn sat by her window staring at her reflection in the glass. She saw herself as she was, older, wiser, lonelier. And behind her reflection, faintly in the darkened glass, the outline of Amelia, young, poised, and patient, seemed to hover like a second self. It was almost poetic, she thought. The woman she once tried to erase had become the only one who could truly understand her. The mirror clause had bound them together, not as enemies, but as reflections. One shaped by legacy, the other by resilience. One built from power, the other from adaptation. And though Evelyn would never admit it aloud, part of her felt relief, because in Amelia she had finally met her match. The year had turned full circle, a year since the wedding. A year since the quiet war began. A year since the bride and her mother-in-law had turned contracts, traditions, and emotions into weapons of precision. Now, the Monroe estate stood at another threshold, not of conflict, but of change. The air was heavy with spring's first rain, and the garden beyond the window shimmered beneath a soft mist. Inside, the house was quieter than it had ever been. The laughter, the luncheons, the whispered conversations, all gone. Only the tick of the antique clock filled the grand hall, a rhythmic echo of passing power. Evelyn sat in her study, her once steady hands trembling slightly as she opened the thick envelope on her desk. The seal bore the insignia of the trustees. Inside was a single document, the final consolidation agreement. It was time. Time to sign away operational control of the estate. It wasn't unexpected. The mirror clause, her own creation, had set it in motion. Each year required both co-beneficiaries to renew their governance rights, either together or not at all, but this year, Evelyn had delayed. Her health had declined, her energy faded, and the board had quietly begun urging for continuity. And continuity now meant Amelia. She read through the document slowly, her eyes catching on each phrase, each legal line that marked the end of her authority. For decades, she had built this empire, the estate, the investments, the legacy. To let go of it felt like surrender. Yet something inside her, something softer, told her, was time. A knock sounded at the door. "Come in," Evelyn said quietly. Amelia entered, poised as always. She was dressed simply, a cream blouse, dark trousers, her hair pulled back neatly. No jewelry, no affectation, just calm presence. Evelyn studied her, almost in disbelief. She had spent so long trying to outmaneuver this woman, to control her, to shape her, and yet here she was, standing in quiet respect, not gloating, not rushing. "You received your copy, I assume," Evelyn said, her tone steady. Amelia nodded. "Yes. The trustees said they need both our signatures today." Evelyn gestured to the chair opposite her. "Sit," Amelia did. The silence between them was no longer sharp. It was heavy, yes, but dignified. Like two monarchs sharing the last negotiation before peace. Evelyn looked down at the document again. "Do you know what this means, Amelia?" Amelia's eyes softened. "It means transition, not erasure." Evelyn almost smiled. "You sound like a politician. I learned from the best." That earned a faint chuckle, tired, but genuine. For a long moment, neither spoke. Rain pattered softly against the windows, and the fire in the hearth crackled like distant applause. Then Evelyn reached for the pen. Her fingers trembled slightly, and she steadied them before writing her name, elegant, measured, final, Evelyn Monroe. The ink shimmered for a moment before drying. She looked up. "Your turn." Amelia took the pen, but before signing, she paused. "Before I do," she said gently, "there's something I'd like to add." Evelyn frowned slightly. "Add?" Amelia slid a single page from her folder across the desk. "An addendum. A simple one."